Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our next speaker is Mr. Graham Barth, Principal Consultant, T-Systems Germany. I'll tell you a little bit about him. Graham's experience in testing spans more than 30 years, and he has covered a wide range of domains and technologies. As a test manager, he has been responsible for the testing of mission-critical systems in spaceflight, telecommunications, and police incident control. As a principal consultant for T-Systems, the systems division of Germany's leading telecommunications company, Deutsche Telekom, he is responsible for consulting customers regarding their testing processes and test organizations. He's built up a training program to include all levels of the ISTQB certification scheme, including the new expert level for the company's large staff of testing professionals. Graham is the chairman of the ISTQB Expert Level Working Party and co-author of books and syllabi relating to advanced level and expert level subjects. Please welcome Mr. Graham Barth.
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming. It's great to be talking here again at SoftTech. I've got a bit of feedback and we'll have to deal with that, I think. Yes, the title of the presentation is ROI. It's not just about the money. So I challenge you in this presentation to go away with some ideas about what ROI really means, what the factors are to take into consideration, and maybe get a new view on what ROI is. Now, that's where I come from. I sound English, that's because I am, but I live in Germany, in this wonderful part of Germany, just near the Alps, so that's my hometown. Moving on to money and finances. Money and finances are all very important these days, but from my experience, what we see is that people actually pay too much attention to financial aspects when it comes to ROI. And so in this particular presentation, we're going to accept the fact that, okay, money's important, but is that all there is? Is that really all there is to ROI? The problem is that if we focus just on the financial areas, it forces us into thinking about particular aspects of ROI, making particular assumptions. And I'm just going to show you 4 of those assumptions, which I think are real key assumptions that we're making. And afterwards, I'll challenge those. So the four assumptions that we're making is that for a proper ROI, you have to quantify and calculate all costs and benefits. Okay, this is an assumption. We're also saying that actually money, financial aspects are the only aspects that you can quantify. That's very often what we're saying when we do a financial-based ROI. We're also taking an assumption that, okay, everybody has the same view of quality. Everybody thinks about quality in the same way, because that's what we're measuring with ROI. And that actual quality is a value-based quality. It's a financial-based quality. So that's an assumption. And 4th one, quantitative ROI is unbiased. It is not open to bias. And I talked just before the lunchtime about bias. So if anybody of you were at that presentation, you'll recognize 1 or 2 aspects there again. So I'm going to look at those 4 aspects. And what we're going to do is challenge those particular aspects, challenge each one of them, and ask ourselves, is this okay? Is this what we want to do? Can we do this more completely? And furthermore, basically I would like you to open your eyes. So You know, it's about, whoa, it's a frightening looking cat, isn't it? When you see it blown up that big. Open your eyes to the actual areas of financial-based ROI. And I find, personally, from my experience, many years in the testing industry, that when we focus just on financial ROI, we make many mistakes and take too many assumptions. So let's get on with it. Let's take the first of the actual challenges or assumptions that I mentioned, and that is that you can calculate all of the costs and benefits for your ROI. Okay. That's what you need for a proper ROI. Now, looking at that seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? All you need to do is calculate your costs, calculate your benefits now and for the future, and bingo, there's your answer. Your ROI falls out. Well, actually, when we do that, three things happen. We find that it's very complicated. So the actual task of calculating the ROI is extremely labor-intensive and difficult. We find also that the actual task of performing the calculation can take a lot of time. And unfortunately, we find that the calculation that you're making is usually in some way unreliable or incomplete. Now, there's a way that I'm going to illustrate that, and that's with using the classic, if you like, textbook approach to calculating the costs of testing and the cost of benefit and the benefits from testing. And that's based upon a book that was produced by a guy called Mr. Duran. It's a big book. As you can see, I've put the London bus in there for scale, so you can see how big that really is. And he actually was one of the first guys to put statistics and metrics to the area of testing. Good for him. But he said all you need to do is calculate the cost of testing, calculate the total cost of failures that you're hopefully reducing by testing, and outfalls the ROI. Well, let's take a closer look at what Duran actually said there. So 2 or 3 slightly technical slides, and then we'll look at the actual practical areas there. So first of all, calculate the cost of defect prevention. This is mostly testing, okay? So you have a nice curve there. What you see is that along the bottom edge, you've got a level of quality that's increasing to the right. Your costs going up the other side. So easy, isn't it? The more money you put into testing, the higher your quality. And there's a curve there. It's a bit like squeezing out a lemon, really, if you've ever tried to do that. You know, at first it's really easy, but then you have to really try hard to get the last drop out, and it takes a lot of energy. And it's the kind of curve we've got there, right at the end. That last little bit of quality costs a huge amount of money. So that was a useful, if you like, insight that Duran gave us. Cool. Right, cool. Useful. So looking at the benefits side, it's also a curve going in the other direction, actually, because what you're doing there is calculating the costs of your failures. Okay, so if you've got low quality here over on the left, your costs of failures are high. As your quality improves, you go along the curve to the right, the costs of your failures go down. Sounds quite straightforward, doesn't it? So all you have to do is combine those two slides, magically find some numbers, and bingo, you can just work out where you are now, what's going to happen in the future, compare the two things, and you've got an ROI, in this case 1 to 1.5. I'm there. Well, that's the theory. Now look at the practice, shall we? If you look at the practice, let's take, for example, this aspect, the costs associated with defect prevention, the costs associated mostly with testing. What do you have to do? Well, we have to find out where we are on the curve. What does our curve in our project look like? What shape is our curve? We don't have a reference. It's easy to draw a curve like that. And actually, that can be useful in itself without putting numbers on the axes. But, you know, is it easy to do that? Can we calculate these curves? Do we have the data for these curves? Do we know where we are? Not really, not really. So what do we do? Let's presume we're trying to do this now. What do we end up doing? What we end up doing is like a work breakdown structure. We think of all the things there are to do with testing, and we put a price on them. Anybody ever tried to do that? No, didn't think so. I've not seen anybody do this because it becomes very, very difficult. Let's just look at one aspect, dynamic testing. Now, this is the kind of testing that we typically do. Let's just look at some of the tasks that you need to look at and provide costs for. So you might start with an initial level where you're saying, okay, well, what do we need? Oh, we need test data. Oh, we need a test environment. We need to execute the test. We can start estimating those. And then we start to think, it breaks down even more. Just look at the test automation, for example. That breaks down into smaller blocks. Each of those blocks, let's look at the scripting. That breaks down into blocks. You end up with a work breakdown structure that is huge, okay? And very often you don't have the data for that. So what happens in reality, we start off with good intentions, but slowly but surely this sort of nagging doubt, this doubt comes along where you say, this is getting really difficult. Will I really be able to calculate the cost of testing? And generally, we reach a point where we unfortunately give up. You start off with good intentions, you give up because the task is so difficult. There's so much to do. Then you revert. You revert to something that's simpler. You revert to, in these two examples here, a head count calculation or a percentage calculation. The head count calculation means, okay, we've got 20 testers in there, all sitting there. So the cost of testing is 20 times their pay, and that's my cost of testing. It's easy enough, but is it correct to say that? And we'll look at that in a moment. The other thing that we do is take a percentage. I bet you that you've used this. I've used it as well, just so that I'm honest. Where you just say, well, let's just take the actual cost of the project, the cost of development. Let's take a percentage of that, and that's our cost of testing. It's often 15%, 20%. So the lazy ROI calculation is go to your development organization, ask them how much the development cost, and bingo, the cost of your testing is X% of that. Well, I would challenge whether that's actually a good way to calculate ROI. First of all, if you're doing a head count, well, you are not taking into account what really those testers are doing. Do they have idle time? Are they really only doing testing? A lot of testers these days are in agile projects. They've got a mix of tasks. Maybe they're doing development as well. maybe the developers are doing testing. It gets mixed up. It gets much more difficult based upon a head count to calculate the cost of testing. And basically, you're not considering things like non-people costs, environments, computers, hardware, software, and so on that you need for testing. And those can be big factors, really big factors. So if you look at the percentage example I gave you, what happens there? Well, hey, we're in testing. Don't we just know it that if you make a small change, one line of code might be enough to change, the consequences on testing can be huge. It's not linear. So taking a percentage of development is just total idiocy. Sorry if I say that, but it's just not right. And you also have the issue of what we say actually in Germany, comparing apples with pears. You're not comparing one thing with an identical model of another. So you can't say that, okay, it's 15% because in that project it was 15%. Well, is your project identical to that one? Usually it's not. There's something different. So we're making life easy for ourselves, and as a result of that, our ROI will be wrong in some way. If we take this approach that we must calculate the costs of everything. So moving on to the benefit part. Now, if you thought calculating the costs was difficult, calculating the benefit, it's worse. It's really difficult, because what are you doing with calculating the benefit of testing? You're trying to calculate, according to Duran, the cost of the failures that you have, your software failures. So what goes into those costs? Well, it's things like rework, retesting, and so on, regression testing, but it's also things like, image loss, loss of contract, loss of motivation, loss of all kinds of things that we're going to find really difficult to quantify. Anyway, has anybody ever tried to do that? Anybody tried to estimate the cost of an actual failure? I mean, I'm sure that there's one or two prime examples where they say, oh, well, the rocket blew up because one line of code was incorrect, and the rocket cost $5 billion, so that goes into the calculation, sure. But have you ever tried to do that in a project and you say, well, we just found a failure. We detected that in testing. What was the saving to the project of detecting that? This is what is demanded of us if we're going to do a proper financial ROI. Good luck if you try that. I've tried that a few times. And the answer is always, it depends on who you're talking to, doesn't it? If you're talking to people that can be objective, that's fine, but mostly people are not objective. So if you're talking to a developer about the cost of a particular failure, what are they going to say? Oh, not much. No, it wasn't. Maybe it was to do with their area. No, just a small one, that was. Now, what's the tester going to say? The tester is going to want to build up the thing. Oh, no, this could have been horrendously difficult. This could have cost us years of market loss. And basically, you end up getting a whole bunch of different estimates for your calculation. If you're going to do a financial, quantitative estimate of ROI, if that's what you're aiming for, you've got to do this. And I would challenge you to do that properly, because I've never seen it done. You are definitely, maybe actually the slide's not appropriate for Malaysia, but where I live near the lakes, they freeze in winter, okay? So danger, thin ice. You are walking on thin ice if you try and do this, even though the principle is okay. Yeah, cost of failures, cost of testing, match them all up, jolly good. Try and do it as an ROI calculation quantitatively, and you're in big trouble. You end up making statements about ROI that are not believable. You're trying often to tell people, my ROI is, oh, okay, 157.65%. Do you believe that when you hear that? Would you believe that as a manager? Most managers will know this, and they're going to say, you are trying to pull the wool over my eyes. You're trying to deceive me. You're trying to make yourself sound scientific. You're trying to make yourself sound, oh, we've got all of those costs, all of those benefits. We've got them all tied down. You probably haven't. So why are you doing this? Well, I ask myself that all the time when I see people calculating ROI like this. Why are you doing it this way? And if you ask them 3 or 4 questions, usually it takes you 2, but let's say 3 or 4 questions, how did you get to this? You very quickly find, well, what's my confidence factor in what you're saying? It's very low normally. So, very, very difficult. With benefits, don't forget you're trying to anticipate things as well. So, you know, it's terrible, and we miss so many of the valuable aspects that testing can bring. The list is long, and I can't go into all of them, but I bet you could add some extra points to this. You know, you've got better methodologies, better ways of working, more motivated testers. If you test more, it motivates the team. You're investing more in testing. So, you know, you're not just doing a little bit of ad hoc testing. Okay, that was cheap, but was that the right kind of thing if you want to motivate your test team to do good work? Maybe not. More skills needs investment, improves motivation, reducing risks. All of these things are the benefits that you get from testing, and they are really there, but you cannot quantify them. It is very, very difficult to quantify them. And if you miss these out, your ROI is in some way flawed. If you just focus on monetary ROI, your ROI calculation, your ROI statement is in some way wrong. It's incomplete. So that's what I'd like to summarize on, and we're just looking at that aspect now. If you try and calculate everything financially, you start off with good intentions, you run into quicksand very quickly, you start to give up, you start to apply different ways of getting around the problem, you come up with something that you are hoping people will accept as an ROI, and to be honest with you, it's probably nowhere near the truth. It's unfortunate, isn't it? Hey guys, got a battery for me? Was there movement in the background? Yeah, there you go. I can continue talking, but, you know, it'd be nice to see some slides. It must have been these balloons that did it. It's all the extra energy. So we're going to move along to the next assumption then. If you remember, there were 4. The next assumption is, well, okay, if I'm going to go for, if I'm going to go for quantitative evaluation, then money is the only thing that I can actually consider. Well, I would ask you to consider a couple of extra things that you can quantify, but they are not actually going to be, they're not actually going to be useful. afterwards. But before we get there, I was considering whether to do this for you, but I will. I'd like to give you some takeaways on what you can do, okay? Rather than highlighting the problem for you and saying go away and figure it out. I've got 1 or 2 slides that give you some help on what you can do, okay? Some tips. So basically, if you must calculate, if somebody says to you, you have got to do this, 1 or 2 tips I can give you is don't try and over-calculate. Don't try and make it precise. Find out what an acceptable ROI might be. It's like jumping over a high jump. You know, if you can jump over, who cares how high the bar is? Ask people what they would consider to be an acceptable ROI. And then with your calculations, try and give them a feeling of confidence whether you are clearing the bar or not. That's a way to approach it if you have to. Don't spend time trying to prove that your ROI is down to 4 decimal places of accuracy. If you do that, the manager that you are presenting this information to will probably laugh. And that will be the end of your probably very expensive calculation. So make your assumptions clear. What you can do is also constrain. You can constrain your scope. And it's quite valid to do that. So if you can say, oh, okay, let's just consider one particular aspect. Test automation is always a good example, isn't it? Take one particular aspect and do an ROI for that. Or let's just say, what's the ROI of introducing better testing techniques? Or something like this. Focus on a small thing. If you try and do an ROI for testing, well, you're opening the world, and you've got to try and calculate that. That won't work. Now, even test automation, since we're on the subject, is really difficult to get a proper ROI, financial ROI on. And I'm reminded of a presentation from I think probably fair enough to say a world expert on this, Mark Fuster, who presented a method for calculating the ROI of test automation. And he was 45 minutes listing out the factors to take into account. By the time he'd finished, he was exhausted. I think most other people were as well, actually. But it just goes to show that even if you can constrain your scope, you've got a lot of things to think about. So, you know, you can constrain your scope, that's valid. If somebody asks you to give an ROI for testing, give them an ROI for testing, or if you can. If they ask you for that and you come back with an ROI for test automation, as we saw a couple of days ago, then you're not giving them the full story, but you can at least say, well, look, for this particular aspect, we get an ROI of this. It might be something. I don't know. Anyway, so constrain your scope. That's one way of doing it, and it's also, I think, much talked down, but qualitative measures can be really, really useful in my experience. Not quantitative, but qualitative. You know, where do we stand today with our testing? Take a group of people. You can represent it, if you like, as a scale between sunshine and thunderstorm, different types of weather along the way on that scale. Get them to put a mark where they think you are. And then propose some improvements and say, well, I think that we could move from being partly cloudy to being, well, mostly sunny. You can express it in a qualitative way. and actually say to people, and get a better feel for that. You can get consensus much more easily between a group of people in this way, quickly. Where are we now? Where do we want to go to? What will be our ROI? Our ROI is we moved from here on the scale to here on the scale. We didn't need to put that into dollars or ringgits or anything else. That can be valuable. So I would give you that as a tip, not to forget that. Now, what you can also do is control your costs by using testing as a service, and that's, if you like, something we're going to be talking about a little later, so I won't dwell on that. But it's a useful way for you to control costs, the cost of testing, so you don't have to do your ROI calculation right up front. You can do it in little iterations as you're going along. Do I want another package? Do I want another element of cost? Oh, no, that's enough. So it gives you sort of like each stage the option of saying, was that enough? But I will come back to that probably in our discussion later on. So that's about this main point. We have to calculate in detail, quantitatively, the financial return of investment. And I don't think, I've never seen it work properly. Maybe Mr. Duran, if he was in the building, would storm up to the front and prove me wrong with his handy little pocketbook, but I don't think so. So let's move along. There are aspects which actually can be quantified, and they can be quite useful. So don't walk away from quantification. But it doesn't have to be financial, okay? And there's two examples I want to give you. One of them is a scale of test process maturity, and one of them is considering lead time. These are just examples for you. You can think of others as well. Let's have a look at test process maturity. What does it give you? It gives you a model. You can take a model of this type, the other type, it doesn't matter. Each of those models gives you a scale of maturity. It's defined. Now, you can agree or disagree on the content of that model, but it does give you some progression from a primitive testing process to, let's call it, an optimized test process. It gives you a way of showing, well, where are we? So, better test process maturity generally means you're doing better testing. You're further along the curve, as it were, in Duran's sense. And, you know, this is useful, but, you know, your quantitative measure is to go from maturity level 1 to 4, let's say. That's proven and can be, if you like, assessed. Now, that's good, but remember, test process maturity, improving it, has got also many non-financial benefits. So remember our discussion about quantifying the benefits? Well, you can improve test process maturity, and the benefits you get are, for example, hey, work that we previously couldn't bid for, we can bid for now, because our customers want a particular test process maturity. Hey, we feel better about ourselves as testers in our team because we have a more mature process. We feel more comfortable in our jobs. We're better motivated. Things aren't chaos every time we start to test a new project. And that's useful for motivation. It keeps people in their jobs. It keeps people in a career path for testing. If they're getting chaos every time because the test process is junk, they're going to leave testing and go somewhere where life is much more cozy, like in development. No, I didn't say that. But, you know, this kind of benefit you get from improving your test process maturity that you can't put into financial figures, but it's a quantitative metric, if you like. We've gone from 1 to 4. It cost us so much. Another one that you can use, a quantitative metric for our lead time in this case. Lead time is basically how long it takes to do something. Between here and here is your lead time. Now, you can invest money in testing to improve lead time. Well, classic is test automation, isn't it? You're not spending so much time actually executing tests anymore compared to your manual approach. So you can actually say, well, our lead time for testing has improved by a factor of 5 by doing this and this and this. What is the benefit? Well, the benefit would be measured in terms of quicker to market for our products, more releases each year. These are big benefits. Put a price on those benefits. Can you? I don't think so. If you tried to, you would find it really difficult. You would probably end up with a very biased kind of an estimate. So I think that actually saying, that a financial, quantitative evaluation of ROI is the only way to go is wrong. I think that you can be quantitative. There's nothing wrong with that, because there are other things that you can look at. A few examples we've had here. But you will find it very difficult to actually convince people in terms of money of those particular benefits. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that there were 4 things I was going to talk about that kind of discuss the myth of trying to calculate financial ROI. And the next one is this. Everyone takes the same view of quality, and it's financially value-based. So this is focusing on the idea of what is quality. Now, we can probably talk, we would say in England, until the cows come home. That's a long time. We could talk for a long time about that. But fundamentally, if you ask yourself, what's testing there to achieve? Well, it's there to achieve the goals of your stakeholders. Okay. Now, who are your stakeholders? Look at that in a minute. But if we neglect your stakeholders, in general, you're going to have a poor ROI calculation. Your basis for your ROI is usually bad. Let's have a look at what that means. It means that if you go back to our friend Duran and his curves, he conveniently forgot to give a scale to this thing called level of quality. Why would that be then? Well, it's because that scale is dependent upon who you ask. It's dependent upon the stakeholder group that you're asking. So putting a scale on there and trying to quantify that, just, for me, a non-starter. But we still need to consider this stakeholder aspect in our ROI. We will need to give ROI estimates, but it doesn't have to be always in the context of financial. So that poses a difficult question. How do different groups of people see and consider quality? Now, Isabel Evans, who's a fantastic presenter, maybe you've seen her before, she came up with a fairly simple concept for dealing with this. And she said, well, do you know what? There are 5 views of quality, and these are them. Not yet. I'm going to put them up one after another. 5 views of quality. The first one is a product, what she calls a product-based view of quality. This is what we know as testers most. This is like saying the functionality is good, or the performance is good, or the security is good. It's often based upon like quality attributes that you might have seen. So it's like a product-based view. Fine. Now, a manufacturing-based view is, well, did we develop the product well? Did we go according to the book? Is the quality of our deliverable documentation good? Was the process we used for developing the product good? Now, good specifications, yeah, it's all there. That's the manufacturing-based. User-based, fitness for use. Simple as that. User-based view of quality is they don't care about all this product and manufacturing stuff. Fitness for use. There is also a curious view of quality that's called transcendent. What a strange word. What it means is I know quality when I see it. I can't touch it, I can't feel it, but I know it's there. It's like a German guy, you know, they love their cars, right? Maybe you do here as well. When I look at a BMW, I can see the quality. That's what they would say. You know what I mean? Now, just to make it clear, I don't represent any company. So if I look at Mercedes, I can see the quality. You know, it's that kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but this is just really good. It's transcendent. Interesting concept, that. Try and put a price on that. Now, the other, you're waiting for it, I'm sure. Value-based, hooray. So there is a value-based approach. There is a value-based view of quality. And that says, okay, is the trade-off between, time, effort, and cost appropriate? Okay, that's my view of quality. So there's 5 of them. So what's this got to do with stakeholders? Well, because if you choose to identify groups of stakeholders, you can allocate those views of quality to those stakeholders. So here are the 4 groups of stakeholders that Isabel Evans focused on. The tester, yeah, we're stakeholders. We have a view of quality. The developer, sure. The manager and the user. Okay, so what Isabel Evans did was she said, let's map those things together and let's see how we take into account different stakeholders' views of quality. Now, she didn't do this for the purpose of a discussion on ROI, but you'll see in my conclusions in a moment, does have an impact on ROI and how you consider it. So let's just look at the manager. Right. The manager thinks transcendent, feelings and perceptions. Yep. Manufacturing, yes, he wants that product to be done according to the book and according to our procedures. Oh, value-based, the manager. Yeah. Let's look at the tester. No, the developer, nearly. The developer. The developer focuses much more on product, the manufacturing, and transcendent. Now, sometimes I've done this, and there's been developers in the audience, and there's been howls of complaint that they say, oh yeah, we look at fitness for use and all this. Well, maybe they do, but it's not their main focus. Okay. This is the main focus I'm showing here. So the developer's looking at product, manufacturing, and transcendent. The tester, aren't we good? We're looking at product, manufacturing, user-based, in the sense that we're doing usability testing, hopefully, and transcendent. Right, well, what about the user? Guess where they've got their focus? Well, the user-based and, transcendent. Did you notice something about those diagrams? What you actually come up with, if you consider the different views of quality, is that only managers have a value-based view of quality. And I'm not saying managers are not important, but they're only one group of stakeholders. Only they consider the value-based. The other stakeholders don't care about value. Well, of course they will to a degree, but basically they don't care. And you know, what comes out of that is also critically, in my view, that the user couldn't care a hoot. Doesn't care about value-based view of quality. They're only interested in fitness for use. Look at how many of you got mobile phones with apps and things like that? You expect that to be usable, don't you? Your users, you don't care how much money was put into developing that app. You don't care about how well it was made. But what you do care is if it's fit for use. Now, those are the views that you take. And what you need to do, therefore, if you're thinking about return on investment, is you've got to ask all of those groups of stakeholders where they see their main return on investment. And the answer you will get will mostly be qualitative. It will not be on the basis of a financial, quantitative ROI statement. The manager might do that, but the rest will focus on other things. Now, if you remember the scale on our diagram that said, you know, level of quality, there's curves for all of those user groups, for all of those stakeholder groups. And you've got to work that into your ROI statement. I'm calling it a statement because to me an ROI statement means you're telling somebody about what you can expect as a benefit for the investment. So you've got different ways of doing it. What can we do? Certainly get stakeholders involved. Try and think up with those stakeholders other kinds of metrics and things that give them value. And if you want to actually put that in quantitative terms, you could say, well, okay, if you're a developer, perhaps the number of, in a support area, perhaps a reduction in the number of user help desk complaints coming onto my desk is a measure of improvement and a return on investment for what you're doing. What you can also do is just simply take a balanced view. Take a balanced view, and there are ways of doing that in management, balanced business scorecards and things like this that do not just focus on financials. Try and do it that way and put your testing effort into a balanced business scorecard. So that's a way of doing it. Now, the last of the 4 points I'd like to challenge is that our ROI estimates, and we're all often involved in having to estimate things, the assumption that we're unbiased. Now, I don't know if anybody was at my presentation earlier, but we talked about bias and different sources of bias there. Now, when I mention this to testers, they're sort of like howls of horror. You know, we're testers. Of course we're unbiased. How could we possibly be biased? It can't happen to us. Well, hi, but here's the news. We're all biased in some ways, and testers have got areas where they can be biased. One of them is in calculation of ROI. So here are just some of the sources. I mean, in my previous presentation, we looked at 9 different things. There are 3 things we're looking at here that give you a flavor of areas where we can be biased in our estimating. Trusting our intuition, overconfidence in our estimating skills, and applying what I call unwritten rules. Let's just look at those. Well, What do we have when we have intuition issues? Basically, our intuition is pretty good if it's based upon a good experience. But invariably, we run into difficulties with our estimating when things get complicated. And calculating ROI is a complicated issue, as we saw before. So what happens? You know, you remember the picture of the girl sitting there going, oh my God, you know, this is really difficult to calculate this. Well, what happens is generally we don't give up. We don't collect and analyze in depth. We just give it a go. We just try our best. We try and solve a problem that actually wasn't the main problem, but I feel more comfortable about solving this problem. It's rather like the situation we had a couple of days ago when people were trying to give us ROI, their estimates of ROI. And they were not giving us the estimates of ROI because it was too difficult. So what they were doing is giving us their ROI for this little bit here that they could solve. And they were being biased. Now, they weren't giving you the information that you wanted. So they didn't give up. They performed what we call substitution, and we do it all the time. Confronted with a problem that is difficult to solve, we as humans, and I think testers are humans, tend to substitute for that difficult question a simpler one that we can solve and we feel comfortable about. That's what we do. And by the way, this is instinctive. We do this. This is not a conscious decision. We do this kind of stuff all the time. I do. We do. So bear that in mind when it comes to you calculating ROI. That's going to be involved. You are biased as a tester. Just think about it. I gave you the example of calculating the benefit of detecting a particular failure early before production. We as testers, are we going to play that down? Oh yeah, okay, it's a quick fix. Oh, €5. Or are we going to say, hey, testing is king. Aren't we good? Look at this, what we found. Cost goes up to the roof, you know? Now, that's bias. So what else can we see in the way of bias? Well, overconfidence in our estimating skills. Based upon a problem that we see that's called what you see is all there is. Now, what you see is all there is means that we don't have perfect information. There are holes in our information. Now, when we think about trying to estimate around that problem area, we fill in the holes ourselves. The example would be a requirement, where we say, okay, requirement is rubbish, we know that. There's all kinds of information missing there. I tell you what, we'll just assume this. We'll fill in those holes. Do I feel comfortable? Yeah, I do. You like having a conversation with yourself. Yeah, that sounds good, Graham. Yeah. And well, I could go with that. You know, you build up a story to convince yourself to feel comfortable with the fact that you have just filled in the gaps and you've assumed that what you see is all there is. The information that you have is all the information you'll ever get. And we do this very much. So, important thing is that, you know, we cannot possibly miss information that's not going to happen to us. Well, it does happen. Moving on to other areas called unwritten rules. This is where we introduce bias a lot in our estimating. And there are just three here that I just quickly want to mention because it comes up. Price to win. Price to win is something that your salespeople adopt sometimes that has nothing. If there's any salespeople in, put your fingers in your ears for 10 seconds. Price to win has nothing to do with a realistic ROI calculation. It's just the price that you want somebody to pay for you doing a job. But unfortunately, it does influence us significantly in our estimating. We tend to find that if a salesman wants us to win the project with a bid for 5 million euros, hey, guess what? The calculation comes in just around 5 million. Well, fancy that, you know? Now, was there bias involved in there? Yes, there was. Okay. So anywhere where you see price to win involved and testers are influenced by this, then you will get bias, which will feed into an incorrect ROI. What else have you got? The keep the team occupied approach. Well, we've got a team of 20 people there. That's the test team. Got to keep them busy. Better make sure that your estimate fills all of the gaps and make sure that all the testers are kept employed. Especially you see this in businesses where you have internal testing teams. And they're sort of like, manager will say, well, they're there in any case. You might as well give them something. And you say, oh, fair enough, okay. Oh, yeah, but it's all got to go into the cost. Later, you see all of the information going into the cost statistics. And you think, well, hang on. Yeah, I've done them a favor of keeping the team happy and keeping the team involved and employed. But now you've just made my ROI really bad by doing that. And this will happen to you, could happen to you. And the manager giving you a target. I'm looking for an ROI of around 2 to 1 here. When you get that from a manager, especially if the manager is a forceful kind of a person, you try and please. You try and meet expectations. You end up adjusting your calculation to meet those expectations. It's a bias. It's not a real ROI. So what I'd like to say is you're trying to please the manager there and not calculate ROI. So those are, if you like, some of the factors that can introduce bias. Now, the point is, this will in particular influence an ROI that's based on financial, quantitative evaluation. This is where those bias factors will have the most impact. The other factors that we've seen, amount of motivation, the non-financials and things like this, less. So I'm trying to say to you that this is another reason why actually focusing on a financial ROI is not a good idea. Now, so far so good. This is the unfortunate conclusion regarding bias. Hey guys, we are. Sorry about that. Our estimates are likely to be off. If we can't quantify what we're doing, what are we doing? Be honest with yourselves. We're probably doing a whole lot of guesswork. Okay, so take those points away with you and think about them, please. And the next time you think about doing an ROI, you know, think of those factors. Now, we're close to the end. Quantitative approach is difficult. Mentioned that. What can we do? Simply being aware is something. You know, an awareness of what can go wrong is something that will help you avoid those banana skins, let's call them. So to summarize then, if we adopt the approach that we are going to be creating a financial quantitative estimate of ROI, we are going to be challenged from 4 sides. Those are the 4 assumptions that we took. We're going to be challenged. Oh, I've got to calculate the costs and benefits quantitatively, financially. We saw what the problems would be in doing that. Oh, well, that means I've got to focus on money. And then you forget all of these other useful quantitative measures that you can take that are also useful to show value of testing. You end up adopting a one-sided view, taking a one-sided view, the manager's view of quality, because only the manager is interested in that particular type of ROI. The other stakeholder groups, not really. So you're challenged from that side as well. And finally, the impact that bias has, and we all have it, the impact of bias is going to be heavier, more significant when you start to do things in a highly detailed, quantitative, financial estimate. What can you do? Well, a whole lot of things mentioned. Constrain your scope, use testing as a service, mix in different types of measures, mix quantitative with qualitative, make sure that your sources of bias are as minimum, as small as possible, and, talk to all your stakeholders. This is just a summary of the points that we had before. There are things that you can do to give you a more valuable ROI, but it doesn't have to be based upon money alone. So that's what I'm saying. Remember, it's not just about the money. Well, thanks for listening. There's quite a lot I covered there, and thank you. Much to my amazement, I'm 10 seconds early, I think. So if we have 10 seconds, no, we have time for a few questions, maybe.
Would you like to have some questions?
Yeah, I'd love to have one or two, yeah. All happy with that? Yeah? I didn't understand you. I've just come down to you.
You do ROI in T systems, within T systems.
Well, oh my God. What is the ROI at T systems? How do we do it? I'm going to get around this. You see, I'm now going to do substitution. Because actually, where I'm involved is not T systems projects, it's customer projects. And I tell them what I've just told you when it comes to ROI. I tell them to look at the broader picture of factors that are to do with ROI, and we very rarely actually bother with the financial ROI. What we do is estimating for bids, but that's a different thing. And I would agree on anybody that would challenge me that I'm biased when I do that. Probably there's, in estimates, bias coming in, but we don't have an ROI at T systems as such. We have lots of different projects, and you can't compare them all. Some are good, some are bad, some are secret. So, any more? Okay, take it away, digest it, and if you want to get back in touch with me with any questions you've got, I'm happy to answer those for you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Graham Barth. Thank you.